The news at 5:45.
Argentina is reported to be flying reinforcements to the Falkland Islands to face the biggest Royal Navy task force to be assembled for 26 years. It's led by the aircraft carriers HMS Invincible with Prince Andrew on board and HMS Hermes loaded with Harrier jump jets and assault helicopters.
HMS Glamorgan, 2nd of April 1982. Dear Hugh and Elizabeth, this is just a quick one to say that today we have heard the news that we're off to the Falkland Islands to bash the Argentinians. This is great fun and very much like Maggie Thatcher to stick up for our few remaining colonies with a show of force. Of course, the whole thing may blow over in a week, but the thrill of some real confrontation away from the nuclear bombs of the northern world in a colonial war is quite exciting compared to the usual dull routine of exercises and paperwork. Darling Christine, although my last letter to you should have been the last, this one, and probably one or two more, may be all that you hear from me for a while. We're off to the Falkland Islands, as you have probably heard on the news, to do a bit of wog bashing. There's a terrific force of ships assembling, 16 British warships steaming south across the Atlantic at a great rate of knots. Terrific.
He was clearly getting very bored with the routine of constant exercises, which is the day-to-day life of the modern Navy. And I think he was even more bored with what one might call the ritual, which was associated with visits to ports, visits to naval stations. So when they were ordered south, his first reaction was that this was a kind of holiday.
Darling Christine, I love you very much indeed, and I hope that you're not worrying about it all. It is much easier for me here because it really is very exciting, but I know how I would feel if you were away. Rest assured that even if the worst happens, I'm in one of the best places in the ship. I shall be in the hangar or on the flight deck all the time. The hangar is the best protected place with thick double doors, and the life rafts are right next to us. The good thing about it is that there seems stacks of time left for some sort of compromise, which I'm sure will happen. The advent of this whole new lifestyle is really quite strange. Normal days and weeks are put into abeyance. Routine paperwork becomes unnecessary. The ship's program becomes non-existent. We're here until something else happens. We're now actually doing something which we always thought about as likely as men on Mars.
I met him first at university, and when he first arrived he was certainly very, very keen Navy. And over the course of his 3 years I think he did start to change, and his attitude to the Navy changed. But on the other hand, he was a great traditionalist. There was a lot he believed in. I think there's a lot about it that he quite enjoyed.
In a way, he was very much a sort of a private person, very much in his own little world sometimes. I knew him, I suppose, best when he was very small, till he was about 11 or 12, because then I went off to university and did other things and didn't really see him all the time. Up to then, he was very much the baby of the family. He was very much the youngest of the three of us. And he was quite a sort of romantic character. When he was that age, he was very keen on Biggles and very keen on all the sort of RAF things. And he liked the sea. And the reason he was sort of going into the Navy was partly sort of romantic thing about this is what the forces are like and this is what the forces have always been like.
Darling Christine, reality is dawning rapidly. At times, the situation seems so absolutely silly. Here we are in 1982 fighting a colonial war on the other side of the world. 28,000 men going to fight over a fairly dreadful piece of land inhabited by 1,800 people. After it's all over and millions of pounds have been expended, they'll be left in peace, having had their homes destroyed by shelling, and the 28,000 men will then go away again. Moreover, one side has supplied the other with its weapons so that the war can be started in the first place. Honour would be satisfied if one of our submarines could just sink a small Argentinian ship, preferably without loss of life. I personally do not want to kill any Argentinians or anybody else. It is a very unreal time. All the preparations for war are carried out, which one thinks of as happening in war films only, but are actually happening now. It is almost like a gigantic spoof.
His views expressed in his letters were, I think, a little bit more extreme than I expected them to be, although I knew he had certain fairly well-entrenched views about certain things to do with the Navy. He sometimes questioned, not to the point of disobeying orders, of course, but he questioned some of the traditions that we had and the customs, but was perfectly able to see the reason for things we did if these were explained to him.
3rd of May 1982, at the Falklands. Darling Christine, the weather is not as bad as they make out, just like England in fact. Yesterday was a lovely sunny day with a very calm sea. The wildlife out here is super, and so much of it. It's very nice looking at them all on the flight deck when we're at action stations. Have you got your new car yet? If not, I hope it comes fitted with Sidewinder missiles. After all, you never know what you might come upon these days. I hope Maggie will have had enough of her war soon, and then we can all go home and become school teachers, vicars, and ban the bomb enthusiasts.
When the Sheffield had been sunk, every member of Glamorgan was allowed to send home an MOD familygram, and so Dave chose to send part of a poem. Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams.
We cannot really believe it's happening, and we all hope for peace, as I am sure do the Argentinian soldiers.
When he suddenly started seeing people actually being killed, and the whole thing totally changed. He said in one of his letters, I think to my parents, that when things started coming over, he threw himself down the deck and thought, silly buggers, don't they know that they're firing live ammunition? Don't they realise this is dangerous? And somehow the whole thing hadn't penetrated. It wasn't just a jolly exercise with another navy, but it was real.
Darling Christine, how I love you so very much. You're absolutely wonderful. You have been very brave indeed over the past weeks, and I'm very proud of you. I had your lovely letters today from the 3rd to the 5th of May. I really like hearing about the happenings at Clungumford. You're a girl in a million, and you're mine, and I love you. Nothing is more important than our love, which can't be hurt by anything. It has grown stronger and stronger over the past 5 years we have been together, and will stand the test of anything. When we are together again, I will be able to comfort you, console you, and love you. But even now that we're apart, it's still there, the confidence and the warm glow. It's a perfect and pure love that lasts forever.
As his letters continued, spasmodically, of course, because after ascension it was only occasionally that they could send letters back, we found him more and more insisting that the war was a dreadful mistake. I think he felt himself quite alone in this until he began to get letters from me and from his brother Jonathan, which showed that the whole of Britain was not, as he supposed, enveloped in a kind of war fever.
Thank you for your long, marvellous letter. It was like a breath of sanity coming into this totally mad world here. I'm glad that you think that way about Mrs. Thatcher and the war, as I have come to think since this business started. I sometimes wonder if I'm totally odd in that I utterly oppose all this killing that is going on over a flag. It's quite easy to see how the war has come about. Mrs. Thatcher imagined that she was Churchill defying Hitler, and the Navy advised a quick war before the winter sets in. Even if Britain does reconquer the Falklands, we still have to talk to the Argentinians and come to some arrangements. So why not settle before a war has devastated the Falklanders Island? We are mostly a peaceful bunch who would not want to shoot anyone. The war just happens. We do shelling of shore positions and we get attacked by aircraft. We dislike both. We're all prepared for fighting at sea when we can at least engage the aircraft with sea slug. But going inshore when you can only see the aircraft at a mile is just suicide.
The reaction that I got back surprised me, really quite considerably, as to how strongly he was against the whole exercise. It just didn't occur to me that a naval officer, even a naval officer I knew very well, would feel like that. He says, I doubt Mrs. Thatcher will compromise at all. The whole thing is so totally ludicrous. What Mrs. Thatcher doesn't realise is that the Argentinians believe the Malvinas are theirs. They've sent pilots on suicide missions against us on a one-way journey because we're out of this range. So they effectively double the range of their aircraft by not going back. And they don't have any air-sea rescue helicopters to pick up the pilots afterwards. In fact, the bravery of all their pilots shows that they are more than mildly interested in the Falklands. The sad thing about all this is that the professional forces of both sides do what they're told. So if two megalomaniac idiots tell them to bash each other's brains out, they do, and there's no stopping them. It'll end up with the equivalent of handing over £1 million to each Falklander and burning the money, and then executing all their young men. And, in fact, you know, he says he's being sarcastic, but I don't feel he was.
It has been a dreadful price in ships to pay. One ship for every 4 aircraft. If we could fight them in the open sea, our chances would be so much better. I would much prefer that their aircraft just did not fight, but it looks like the only way to end this will be to break the back of their air force. Certainly the trivia of life and the important things have all been brought to mind by this, and how much the trivia are at the forefront of normal life, and the important things put away, or not done, or left to do later, and then forgotten. Here certainly the material things are unimportant, and human things, values and ways of life, are thought about by everybody.
For 6 weeks, Elizabeth and I listened to every news bulletin from 6 in the morning through to the night. And the news as it came through was so often utterly fuzzy. A destroyer has been hit. Which destroyer? Inevitably, we always thought Glamorgan had been hit. Inevitably, there was always an interval of at least 24 hours before the name was released. So that my main memory is, of course, of 6 weeks in which one could really think about nothing else but what was happening.
Darling Christine, how I love you so very much and think of you much of the time. Thinking of you makes me feel happy, and I often have dreams where we're going off in your new car, doing lots of fun things and having great adventures. It doesn't feel that you're very far away. I can't imagine it as summer somehow, and seeing cricket in the papers is very odd. I'm looking forward to when I can put my dreams into practice.
A radar operator noticed an echo coming on towards the ship beyond the range at which we knew the howitzer shells were able to be fired. This was soon assessed as a missile. At that stage we didn't know what, but the assumption was that perhaps it was an Exocet. We took all the precautions which our tactics dictated we should take. The ship was proceeding at high speed, about 25 knots, and we turned away from the missile in order to make it a stern chase and to present the minimum radar echo to the missile head. We fired our own Seacat missile at it. Young able seaman Gillings fired. We don't know how good a shot it was, but suffice to say it did not bring down the Exocet missile, but it may of course have deflected it. Very fortunately, because the ship was turning, and possibly for other causes, the Exocet hit us on deck instead of through the ship's side. When it exploded on deck, most of the explosion went into the hangar, which was immediately adjacent to the point of impact. The hangar doors were blown in, and very sadly all the men inside the hangar, including David Tinker, were killed instantly.
Christine was told the news the same day, but was instructed that she must not tell anybody until the news was made public. So in fact we only heard 2 hours before the news came over on the 9 o'clock news on Sunday night.
And he rang and he just said Dave's been killed. And that was about all he managed to say. And we couldn't say anything back, really. So we were out there by the next day, wondering what on earth we could do, really. It's a very unreal experience.
In the course of the bombardment, the destroyer HMS Glamorgan was hit by enemy fire, and 9 members of the ship's company were killed and 17 injured. Next of kin have been informed.
I found it comforting in a way. It was also obviously very painful in another way. But I certainly felt I had to come here very soon after Dave was killed, just because this is where we were together. And I suppose in a way I was trying to find Dave again, and it was a help to come back.
The ship's company were mustered on the flat deck, which of course was a smouldering ruin, and those who had died were on the deck below in shrouds, as is usual, covered by the white ensign. And as is usual, their comrades wrote messages on the shrouds.
And the 13 men who had been killed, including David Tinker, were committed to the deep. And we held a moving service conducted by our young chaplain. And it was a very moving moment, very sad, but it was quite remarkable how the sunset and the calmness of the sea that evening seemed to be very special.
Naturally, for us, our lives are saddened, and although we have 2 marvelous sons who support us, we are bound to spend a lot of time thinking about the years that will never be for David.
And it all seemed such a total waste.
This is a fragment which he asked to be put on his gravestone if there was a body to be buried. He was the ungathered blossom of quiet, still a heave in a deep well at noon, or lovers met, than sleep or the heart after wrath. He is the silence following great words of peace.
The Letters of David Tinker. Well, now to our next film by a Dutch crew, which spotlights a prisoner of war camp the world has never seen. The shooting has stopped, but you'll still remember the appalling events in Lebanon in the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's now become a diplomatic struggle. But what's been obscured until now, yet is crucial to the outcome, is the fact that both sides still hold prisoners of last year's war. Jonathan takes up the story of the hostages of war.
It's now 9 months since Israel invaded Lebanon to crush the PLO. But today, Israeli troops are still in occupation on Lebanese soil, while negotiations for their withdrawal are deadlocked. The fate of the Palestinians is also unresolved, not least those who were rounded up by the victorious Israeli army more than 7 months ago. Now, for the first time, Israel has allowed a film crew inside the prison camp that it set up in Lebanon. El Ansar was built by the Israelis on Lebanese territory to imprison Palestinians. Here in South Lebanon, Israel is in total control. There are more than 5,000 prisoners in El Ansar, mostly Palestinian, some Lebanese. 3,000 more are thought to be held across the border in Israel. According to Amnesty International, 10,000 people have been through this camp so far. The Israelis insist that their captives are not prisoners of war. There are no charges and no trials, which would be impossible on territory outside Israeli jurisdiction. Instead, Israel declares that as their prisoners belong to no official army and no established state, they're terrorists. However, the Israeli League for Human Rights claims that only a few hundred of the men in this camp ever fought for the PLO against Israel. These Palestinians are held indefinitely, nor are they protected by the Geneva Convention governing prisoners of war.
شي 500 واحد تعرف صاروا يلمونا من الشوارع يعني احنا ما دخلنا في حرب ولا دخلنا في عسكر. انا انسان صيدلي مثلا يعني تعرف مهنتي مهنه انسانيه.
ربطونا بايدينا وعصرونا عيونا للصفا. قعدنا 3 ايام بالصفا. بعدين اخذونا على فلسطين على اسرائيل. مج جبل عامل. فتنا على التحقيق اسئله بدون اي شيء يعني
بدون تعذيب بدون شيء.
ما في عذاب ولا خلينا حتى بالرحله هاي لا ضربه ولا ضربنا ولا شيء. مع انه في ناس كانت تنضرب احنا لا ما شفنا الضربه ابدا.
The International Red Cross is the only outside agency allowed into Ansar, but it's forbidden by its own statute to discuss conditions there. Yet some Israeli soldiers and MPs have alleged there's been brutality and torture here, that there's a serious shortage of food, water and medicine. The compounds, which each hold 500 men, are run by Palestinian mayors, and in an interview conducted in the presence of Israeli guards, it's the mayors, not the Israelis, who are blamed.
لا كانوا يعذبونا ولا كانوا يضربونا، كان الضرب من المخاتير اللي عندنا، وكان قلية الأكل كمان من المخاتير والشاويشية اللي عندنا. صحيح. بالمخيمات.
المخاتير شو جنسيته؟
في فلسطينية وفي لبنانية، بس كانت الكلمة للمختار بالمخيم كله يعني، هو اللي بده إياه.
The only way out of Ansar camp is to get a hearing at the Daily Appeals Tribunal. In this tent, Israelis and Palestinians, parties that do not officially recognize each other, sit down together as jailer and captive. A Palestinian construction worker listens as his application for release is read back to him. In it, he states that he was arrested over 9 months ago, that he's never been charged, and that until now he's never even been questioned, an assertion that evidently disconcerts the tribunal. He says that he has a family to support and requests his freedom.
يعني شو كانت علاقتك مع المناظرات؟ كان عندك علاقة؟
لا ما عنده علاقة بالمرة ما عنده علاقة
ولا تجميل إجباري ولا إشي؟
لا ما ختمت لأنه كنت أنا في العمل كنت أبات في عملي لأنه عملوا حواجز هني على المفارق.
The system is explained by the camp commander.
כל אסיר יכול להגיש בקשה לוועדת ערעורים על זה שהוא עצור כאן. ועדת ערר יושבת ודנה בבקשה שלו, וכשהיא מגיעה למסקנות שאפשר לשחרר אותו, והבקשה שלו צודקת, משחררים אותו. וזו הסיבה שאנחנו משחררים כל שבוע ביום שני וביום רביעי עשרות של אסירים.
On this Wednesday, the prison bus attracts a crowd of expectant relatives waiting for the next batch of men to be released. But there are only 3 of them on board. Last month, frustration at the slow release rate erupted into a riot in Sidon, and in the melee, a woman was shot by Israeli troops.
المعسكرات يعني وضع المعسكرات بصورة عامة حياة اجتماعية مش مظبوط. عرفت كيف؟ بالنسبة كمان برضو بالنسبة للتموين يعني والمواد الغذائية برضو كمان مش مظبوطة. وكثير من شغلات لحد إسا بياخدوا الشباب على التحقيقات والتحقيقات كلها على حكي الفاضي.
في تعذيب شيء يا ملا؟
تعذيب ما
ضرب؟
ما في يعني هلا بهالوقت هذا ما في تعذيب بينما في السابق كان في تعذيب.
Northeast of Ansar, in another part of Lebanon, in territory under the control of Syria, Israeli prisoners have been held by Palestinian captors. The PLO took their Israeli captives to a secret location in the mountains, hoping for a deal with Israel that has yet to be struck. The remnants of the PLO in Lebanon are anxious to demonstrate that they can still muster a show of strength. So, for the benefit of the camera, they recreate the ambush in which they captured 8 Israeli soldiers last September. They use that ambush as evidence that they can still operate as a skilled fighting force behind enemy lines. 6 of the 8 Israelis have been held in this hideout. Their 30 guards from the PLO's Al-Fatah group were acutely sensitive about security. Although they allowed the Red Cross to visit this camp, they feared an Israeli raid and forbade any filming except a simple interview with their captives.
שמי אלי אבוטבול, אני בן 19, מעכו. אני מרגיש בסדר, אני רוצה למסור להורים שלי שלא ידאגו. המצב שלי בסדר גמור, שיחזיקו מעמד עד שכל העסק הזה ייגמר.
משחקים קלפים, שחמט, צופים בטלוויזיה, ורדיו יש לנו.
רדיו יש לכם?
כן.
אתם יכולים להקשיב כל רדיו שאתם רוצים?
נכון.
אתם יכולים להקשיב לכל
כן,
ישראל? כן,
מקשיבים לכל ישראל, שומעים חדשות.
התיידדתם עם אנשים פה?
ברור.
סליחה?
ברור, תקופה ארוכה שאתה חי איתם באותו מקום. חייבת את זה איתם, מדברים. זהו.
אתה מסתכל אחרת על האנשים האלה עכשיו?
כרגע, כיום בטח.
איך אחרת? איך אתה מסתכל עכשיו?
אני לא חושב, קודם לא הכרתי מי אלה. תמיד מה שהיה ידוע לי שאנשים באופן שלילי. עכשיו איך שאני רואה זה שעם אנשים כמו כל אנשים שהם נלחמים לאיזה מטרה.
The Palestinians also have 2 Israelis held by the Ahmed Jabril faction of the PLO, over which Yasser Arafat has limited influence. However, the camp commander here insists that both men are alive and well.
أعتقد هاي المسألة صارت معروفة. الأسرى 8 عند الثورة الفلسطينية والتفاوض يكون على 8 وإن كانوا 2 عند فصيل آخر يعني هذه مسألة ما تضر بوحدة القرار.
بس 2 اللي عند فصيل آخر هن بصحة جيدة.
تقدروا تسألوا عنهم الفصيل نفسه وأنا أكد إنه أكيد يلاقوا نفس المعاملة الطيبة.
Negotiations for the release of the prisoners held by both sides are conducted fitfully through the Red Cross and the Austrian government. Israel demands the safe return of her 8 men. In response, the PLO has offered to hand them back if the 5,000 Palestinians in Ansar are given prisoner of war status by Israel.